There are more trees on Earth than there are stars in the galaxy or cells in our brains. For as long as there have been people, plants have been at the centre of every human civilization across the globe. First appearing on Earth more than 450 million years ago, plants account for 80% of the weight of all living things, a source of shelter, sustenance, fuel, tools, decoration, adornment, medicine and myth. Humanity's history and evolution has, for millions of years, been intimately entangled with that of the plant kingdom, an impossibly rich, ancient and abundant form of life, but one utterly different from our own. For too long though, particularly in the industrialised West, plants have been overlooked, devalued, instrumentalised or ignored. They're fundamental to the existence of all life on Earth, from producing the atmosphere we breathe, to harvesting the sun's energy and converting it into food and fuel for every form of living organism. But we rarely dwell on their unique and extraordinary behaviours. The Botanical Mind, Art, Mysticism and the Cosmic Tree investigates the ongoing significance of the plant kingdom to human life, consciousness and spirituality. Originally conceived as a group exhibition for Camden Art Centre's galleries, the project brings together modernist, surrealist and outsider artists alongside historical and ethnographic artefacts, textiles and manuscripts spanning many continents and more than 500 years. It includes new and recent work by contemporary artists, each of whom, in very different ways, are engaging with both sacred and secular aspects of plant thinking and being. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, the exhibition has now been postponed until later in the year. In this new programme of online digital artworks, texts, films and podcasts, we have the opportunity to expand upon many of the ideas and issues that are rooted in the exhibition. During this period of enforced stillness, our behaviour might be seen to resonate with plants. Like them, we're now fixed in one place, subject to new rhythms of time and contemplation. The life of a plant is one of constant, sensitive response to its environment, a process of growth, problem solving, nourishment and transformation, all played out at speeds and scales very different to our own. In this moment of global crisis and change, there has perhaps never been a better moment to reflect on and to learn from them.
Nature operates through patterns in the repetition of forms. This was a starting point for the exhibition, looking at the many artists and thinkers across diverse cultures who've contemplated the patterns and shapes that make up the world we live in. As plants are rooted to the ground, they've evolved to grow flowers that attract insects and birds to pollinate for them. This is a form of intelligence in nature that operates not by rational thought, but through the senses, aesthetics that communicate across the boundaries of animal and plant. The plant kingdom is full of spiral and fractal geometries, from the arrangement of camellia and dahlia petals, to the seeds in a sunflower head or the fractals of a Romanesco broccoli. These shapes recur throughout nature in different scales, in the animal, mineral and vegetal kingdoms. The curve of a conch shell resembles the unfurling of a fern and the spiral of a lizard's tail. These same shapes are amongst the oldest artworks known to exist, and are emulated in global cultures and religious aesthetics through time, from the sacred geometries of Islamic art to the abstract carvings of the Neolithic site at Newgrange, Nordic Viking ornaments, and the acanthus decoration that features in Byzantine, Romanesque, and Gothic architecture. Our ancient ancestors seem to understand that there's an encoded intelligence in the patterns of nature, blueprints for the natural world. In the Amazon rainforest, the patterns found in nature are the basis of sacred geometries that indigenous people paint onto their skin and ceramics, or weave and embroider as textiles and beadwork. They call these patterns kene, which means design, but the meaning is much more vast than that word suggests. Many say that these patterns once connected the universe in a continuous tissue, a primordial reality in which the planes of existence, of material and immaterial, the visible and invisible, were once unified and whole. The Yawanawa people are settled in villages along the banks of the River Gregorio in the Brazilian rainforest. They're guardians of 200,000 hectares of biodiverse virgin rainforest. They survived violent contact with Western society, and after nearly a century of domination, they've reclaimed their land and freedom. They live in harmony with the natural cycles of nature, nourishing a profound connection with the healing plants of the Amazon. In collaboration with Delfina Munoz de Toro, we've been working with artists from the Yawanawa family to develop a new artwork for the Botanical Mind, based on their traditional designs that express their cosmology, their aesthetic vision involving plants, animals, and beings from the spirit world. In the 20th century, many European artists and thinkers were inspired by indigenous cultures in the Americas, including Yves Leloy and Wolfgang Paulin. Josef and Annie Albers spent periods of time in Mexico and Peru, where their work was influenced by pre-Columbian aesthetics, from the ancient stone carvings at Mitla to the traditional textiles of Andean weavers. Indigenous Amazonian people have a wealth of knowledge about their plant allies, gained not through scientific experiment, but in communion with music and the senses. They make allegiances with plants that they consider to be sacred ancestors, emissaries of spiritual wisdom, plants that guide them and reveal their healing properties and preparations as musical transmissions, icaros, or healing songs. In the Shipibo-Conobo lineage, an ethnic group indigenous to the Amazonian lowlands of Peru, these songs have both visual and oral form, distinctive vocal and percussive music that's whispered, whistled and sung to stimulate contact with a subtle dimension that's interlaced with intricate abstract geometries. For these communities, both music and visual abstraction are central to their deeply entwined relationship with the rainforest.
The intrinsic connection between geometry and music has been contemplated by European philosophers and artists since antiquity. Stretching back to Pythagoras in the 6th century BC, the idea of a music of the spheres prevailed in Europe until the Renaissance. A correspondence across all aspects of the universe, an implicit harmony, mathematical in principle, figured as an act of music. Over 2,000 years later, the English physician, astrologer, philosopher and occultist Robert Fludd upheld this theory of a universal music, connecting two horizons, the material element of earth and substance and the energetic, spiritual domain of the sun. Before the so-called scientific revolution, the European worldview was built around these intuitive relationships, a natural science based on intimate, lived knowledge and equivalence and balance with nature. Correspondences between movements in the celestial realm and the properties of the material world, the so-called principles of as above, so below, or as within, so without, informed a practice of plant medicine based on the humours of the body. These alchemical principles, which were often understood in musical terms, were revealed in the cosmological drawings and illuminated manuscripts of mystics and thinkers like the 12th century German abbess Hildegard von Bingen, the Jesuit scholar and polymath Athanasios Kircher, and the unknown author of the mysterious Voynich manuscript, an extraordinary Renaissance codex written in a still undeciphered language. The manuscript was discovered in 1912 and appears to be a pharmacopoeia, an esoteric book of medicine bringing together herbal, cosmological, pharmaceutical and astrological wisdom. With the advent of the Age of Enlightenment in the late 17th century and the advance of scientific materialism, many of these ideas were driven underground, hidden for centuries in various traditions of occult art, thinking and philosophy. These old ideas were thought of as being unscientific, dangerous even, and became subject to the same colonial values of reason and progress that destroyed indigenous cultures abroad. But they would resurface in the 20th century in works by a number of outsider, surrealist and modernist artists, including Anna Zemenkova, Adolf Wolfli, Hilma af Klint, Ethel Cahoon and Eileen Agar.
Many of the works in the show revolve around the concept of an axis mundi or cosmic tree, a universal archetype that appears in the symbolism and mythologies of numerous religions. From the giant Yggdrasil that connected the 9 worlds of Norse mythology, to the Tree of Knowledge in the Garden of Eden, and the Islamic tree of immortality, again and again the human condition is connected to the physical and transcendental universe through the image of a plant. Often, the cosmic tree is associated with the serpent, a common image from the story of Genesis, or Yggdrasil, whose roots were filled with snakes. The exhibition includes works from many cultures and centuries that show these ancient and connected motifs of the sacred tree and the serpent. The great psychoanalyst Carl Jung was not only a profound thinker, but also an artist who recovered many early alchemical ideas and championed their relevance to the operation of the mind, re-envisioning mind as intrinsically involved in manifesting the material world. He developed a deep understanding of the archetypes of the collective unconscious and how they emerge as symbolic images. In the early 20th century, he created an extraordinary manuscript, the Liber Novus, now commonly known as the Red Book. It's filled with symbolic images he discovered in the depths of his mind. The tree was a recurring motif. He pictured the tree of life as both supporting and connecting every aspect of the cosmos. Planted in the earth, its roots reach down through the terrestrial realm towards darkness, the shadow realm, whilst its branches stretch up through the celestial towards the star-filled heavens. For Jung, the flower-like figure of the mandala was another important motif and a representation of this cosmic plant. Common in Christian art of the early Middle Ages, as well as Indian, Japanese, Persian, and Mesoamerican religions, the mandala is one of the oldest spiritual symbols, a representation of the universe, a cosmological map, and an aid to meditation. It operates as a transformative image that exists within the mind, whilst having expressions in the external world. Jung explained that the mandala and the plant archetype were deeply related, the mandala symbolizing the self as if seen in cross-section, whilst the tree, seen in profile, is the self in a process of growth. The many mandalas that appear in Jung's Red Book were created with a method he called active imagination, an attempt to form in matter his innermost thoughts and the structure of his psyche. In Jung's concept of the archetypes, he perceived continuities between the forms of physical as well as psychic reality, essential patterns, regularities of form and structure that appear in nature and arise naturally in the mind. Popularized fractal or spiral geometries associated with psychedelia appear not only in the morphology of plants, but in the visions induced by mind-manifesting plant medicines, like psilocybin, found naturally in certain mushrooms, mescaline, arising in the peyote cactus, or dimethyltryptamine, a substance secreted naturally in the brain and activated when drinking ayahuasca. The continuity between inner images and the behaviour of subtle matter compelled Henri Michaud to create a series of automatic drawings under the influence of mescaline, and Theosophists Annie Besant and Charles Leadbeater to develop an occult chemistry in which they intuited the constituent shapes of matter at the atomic level by concentrating their minds in meditation. The mystical experiences invoked by psychoactive plants, as well as encounters with Eastern mysticism, became central to the countercultural revolution in the 1960s, exemplified in art, music and literature by figures like Bruce Conner, William Burroughs, Aldous Huxley and Brian Gysin. Scholars have also accounted for a role of entheogenic plants in the development of global religions, including speculation that the mystical substance soma in the ancient Indian Vedas was a psychoactive mushroom, and that the ritualistic use of psychedelic plants also played a part in the development of Christianity. Perhaps then it's also true that the cosmic tree is the philosopher's stone sought by the alchemists, the ultimate transformative substance that brings forth truths from the unconscious and provides access to mystical and transcendent encounters with divinity.
Today, there is a greater urgency than ever to reconsider our relationship with the natural world as the climate crisis accelerates and habitats are being destroyed at an unprecedented rate. At the same time, new discoveries in quantum biology, new botany, and plant physiology and neurobiology are forcing us to rethink long-held beliefs around consciousness and matter, as well as urging an expanded philosophical and ethical engagement with non-human entities. The idea of plant sentience is often dismissed, as its characteristics can easily be overlaid on the signs of consciousness expressed in human or animal subjects. But there is an increasingly urgent turn toward trying to think the world of the plant. How do we do this, though, without reducing them to our own ways of being? How do we attend to them on their own terms? If the animal is bounded by a body that moves, the plant is instead defined in being sessile, rooted in one place, subject to change and growth in a complex and highly sophisticated relationship with its environment. We now know that plants have a memory, that they can learn from experience and environmental stimuli. We know that they have extraordinary and still unexplained powers of mimesis, that they can interact and communicate not just with other plants but with other animals and insects in highly manipulative ways. And their vast and extremely sensitive root structure, their decentered collective intelligence, provides a far more modern way of thinking about social and environmental relations. A world wide web, millions of years old. Unlike us though, plants do not possess a neurological centre. Their life is expressed and lived in ways that are still difficult for us to understand or access. But like art perhaps, they are defined by a state of ceaseless unfolding and forming, a kind of material knowledge or thinking without thinking, and an insatiable, immanent becoming.